Welcome to the Morning Philip series, hosted today on YouTube. The Morning Philip series, originally hosted at the Garage Co-working Space in Rapid City, South Dakota, was created to discuss philanthropy, civil society, and community. It is an opportunity to have a conversation with good people doing good things creatively and collaboratively. The format is a conversation, not a presentation, 2 tables, 2 chairs, 2 computers, and a community of interested people. Today, we are pleased to have with us a citizen of the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe, philanthropic leader, and host of her own cooking show. A special thanks to the Bush Foundation, the Numad Group, Rural Philanthropy Institute, and the Garage for hosting today's conversation. Thanks to all who have joined us for over 70 conversations in the past. Now, with all that, we are pleased to welcome Eileen Briggs with the Bush Foundation. Eileen, thanks for spending time today with us and for the time yesterday. But thank you for doing this virtually.
Yes, honey wash day. It's so great to see everyone. Good morning. Good to see you, Matt. I'm really glad to be with you today. It was a great conversation yesterday, and I'm looking forward to continuing that with you and just having a great conversation. I want to thank everyone for being here today and listening in, and I'm looking forward to what I can share and offer some of my perspective.
I'm really looking forward to it as well. It'll be great to.
I'm going to get serious now, Matt. Look out.
Your glasses are going on. Okay.
Things are happening.
Let's start with a really serious question, although it really is, but it can take us anywhere that you want to go. This has been understatedly, this has been a significant year and a half for so many reasons. And I just open it up to you. How has the last 18 months been for you?
Yeah, that's a good question and a hard question for me, for anyone this year. I think, we have seen a great leveling of what it means to be to live in a place of fear, a place of not knowing, a place of, and also a place of connectedness, a way of being connected across our globe in a way that we've never seen in our lifetime. And so what it's been like for me and for my family and community has been certainly a centering on our circle of family and community to really be in it's really showing where our relationships are, our strains of relationships are. This year has shown so many pieces of our society that I think a privilege and a sort of a dominant cultural framework has just really is really invisible to many, many, many folks in the dominant community. But we've seen these cracks and fissures that, for many people we've lived with and known and been pointing to for many, many years. And it's certainly been something that's shown a light on the disparities in our country and the injustices and also the continued, plight of folks. And, sadly, so many know what it's like now to not be able to get, just with the pandemic, not to be able to get a bed for your loved one at the hospital, or not be able to struggle with that. And, growing up on the reservation and our communities, we've known that struggle and not sure where, our relatives are going to be, when they get sent out. So there's just a lot of things that feels like, in a lot of ways, a lot of people understand each other's perspective. But I would say, finally, I think that it's risen a lot of courage, and we've shown our light to one another in ways that, are quietly happening, because the news stories aren't going to show all of those lights and hope that we're giving one another so we can keep going. And, that's part of why, I've been doing this cooking show. It's just been live on Facebook with my friends, but I've just felt like, that's one of the things that we haven't been able to do, is share a meal. together across this time. I think more with safety. We've been trying to do that with family and friends, but I think that's a time when we really connect and we all find some common ground. And, that's been, this year has really called on all of us to find something that we can give each other.
Thanks, Eileen. You work for one of the largest foundations in the region. Would you talk about how society's more recent emphasis on racial injustices that you just spoke about have impacted the work at Bush this past year? It seems
Yeah,
like there's a lot that
ahead.
has rolled. There's a lot that's rolled out, and how have the realities of the last 18 months impacted the foundation?
Well, I think the Bush Foundation, serving this region of the Dakotas and Minnesota and the 23 Native nations that share that same geography, we've had a focus on, racial equity or equity in general for in various degrees of highlight over our years of existence. And I think the work that I've seen in the last year since George Floyd's murder in Minneapolis really we were really thankfully poised to respond in a quicker way than I think we maybe would have been had we not been talking about inequity or issues of racial equity across our foundation for a number of years. I mean, I work at the foundation at some level because, the foundation's been looking and sees Native nations as sovereign and has been investing in the tribes in this region, their support of their strengthening their tribal governance and really focusing on that. And so in this really difficult time in our country has arisen, we really were able to not just respond as staff, but to really say with our board members who have been having amazing conversations with one another and preparing themselves for the kind of nimbleness that's really necessary. And that's where the idea and the opportunity to look at the money that we do have in the foundation of $100 million and using a social purpose bond approach to really just activate that and think about in what ways could we be part of, the call for reparative or reparations or some kind of restorative act. What could we be doing? And the $100 million commitment from the Bush Foundation to really address racial wealth gaps, which is a tremendous issue, right? But to really address that with an opportunity to find a stewarding organization to really develop and design a program that would get that money into the hands of Black and Indigenous or Native folks in our region, into the hands of individuals, was an approach that we could take. We know how critical it is to invest in individuals and as an organization, and this opportunity to really see how could we share that share that power really of money and get that in the hands of folks in our region. How could we do that? And this $100 million commitment and they're addressing searching for a community trust fund steward was just one. I've never thought I'd be a part of something like that, and here I am with my colleague Jackie Statham Allen helping to lead that search.
Mm-hmm. I want to pick up on something you said about and brought it out to philanthropies in general, and then spend some time talking more about this $100 million initiative. But before going there, we've had in most recent history here that we're talking about the murder of George Floyd. Before that, the murder, years ago, the killing of Michael Brown, and so many other losses just in these last less than decade. And you mentioned the response to what the inequities that have come to light with the murder of George Floyd from philanthropy. My question, I guess, is do you see that this is a response from philanthropies across the country to what is currently in the news, currently occurring in our country right now? Or is this the change? Is this a systematic change in philanthropic approaches to systemic issues that have caused the inequities? Am I clear?
Right.
Is it a
Well,
response to what's happening, or is it philanthropies across our country are changing the way that they're approaching to change the systems in which our society operates?
Well, from my perspective, I think that it is, I think it for many foundations and perhaps corporate, giving in this time, particularly in response to the racial unrest and conversations and demands from community, some of that has been responsive. It's just, something that just is something to be done in this moment. And some of it's performative. That is, I think that is true. And yet that has been called out, right? In this place, in this time where you see community and organized response to and criticism of philanthropy to really, mean what they're saying and to mean it for the longer haul, because it really is systemic. And the philanthropic wheels that turn, the world of philanthropy isn't has its feet to the fire, I believe. And I think that you are seeing more approaches, and I'm grateful. I've worked within philanthropy, but just like any other sector, the wheels of change and turning are definitely move at their own pace. And yet I've seen philanthropic organizations really try to say, what kind of conversations do we need to have within our own staffing, with what is our leadership structure within our organization. And you're seeing those sorts of shifts, which are influential and critical to know that those kinds of shifts in how grant programming and the directions that philanthropy is taking, the larger foundations, have initiated racial, racial equity initiatives, Kellogg, others that are significantly making shifts. And the demand from the field, particularly of people of color and Black and Indigenous folks, we're definitely making, this our role within those organizations and saying, this needs to be for the long haul. This won't stand if it's going to be a short-term sort of response. So I have seen that, and I am seeing that in a shift. Mm-hmm. And I'll be frank, like the jury, we're still out on that, And what does long haul mean? I think is another piece. Are we talking about what does that mean? It's embedded, and this is the way we do work. Yeah, there may be significant shifts in foundations, looking at how they invest their dollars and open up programs. And it might be that organizations won't make those shifts, and they'll continue to receive pressure from community.
Sure, thanks. Can we turn now to the $100 million program that you're co-leading, that the Bush Foundation announced, I believe, last March. And will you talk a little bit about that program and the intent behind it?
Yeah, so yes, our investment and really looking at racial equity, is really this $100 million commitment to seed, 2 community trust funds that will address wealth disparities that are caused by historical racial injustice. And, these opportunities are an opportunity to directly invest in Black and Native communities across our regions through grants to individuals. And, really, the goal of these grants is to help build stability and generational wealth by improving some access to opportunities like education or home ownership or even, entrepreneurship. And, this is something that is, is something that is a restorative in a way, a reparative action that we see is our one of our opportunities now to really give the stewarding organization the opportunity to be in great and deep conversation with community about how they design such a program. And as the Bush Foundation, we aren't dictating specifically how that program design, what the design actually is, but we are, expecting the community to be engaged as they design that. So this is a new step, really, in a new place for philanthropy in general. Oftentimes, when they design a program and they're offering something like that, they have a particular expectation or point of view. And for us, we do definitely see that we have done the research on that. Racial wealth gaps are very real, and for our Black relatives, for every dollar for a white family in this country, there's 13 cents that they have, and for a Native community individual, 8 cents. So that is real, distinction, and that's happened because of race-based or racially based policies, everything from redlining to, the Homestead Act, all kinds of issues around the GI Bill, where Black and Native military veterans were not given access to the GI Bill after World War II, and that for many, and so those sorts of places where people could build wealth and have homes and be a part of that opportunity to build wealth. It just those opportunities, and no 100 million that the Bush Foundation is going to give is going to restore all of that. But given our region and given the population and the opportunity that we can sort of be able to provide through this opportunity, I'm excited about that. I really think that these stewarding organizations, as they're selected, will really help to leverage and create the kind of wealth building opportunities that fit those communities.
Eileen, when you, just for clarity for everybody tuning in, do I understand correctly, every dollar that a white family has in savings, individuals in savings, right, and is 13 cents an African American individual has, and 8 cents. Is that the data point?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think just the typical household has 13 cents of wealth for every dollar of wealth owned by a white American in the Black community, and then and that data was last.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit in 2019, but for Native folks, that was 2000 data that we were able to find, which was 8 cents of every wealth for every dollar owned by an average white household. Yeah.
Is it part of the goal, however the process is, that those numbers change in our region with this seed money? The beginnings of those things change in our region.
I think that it is I do think it is the beginning. Obviously, data and statistics, as I've said, being able to track that data for our communities is obviously a challenge, particularly for Native communities, but it can't, we all know that the census is the tool, and as flawed as it is for our communities, that is one of the ways. But we are looking for those changes, and we're also asking for the community to name their definitions of wealth as well, because it isn't just dollars. Wealth is defined in many different ways. So, those are the things that, again, we as a philanthropic organization might be naming those wealth inequities at this point, because that's the part of the perspective of the world that we have. Mm-hmm. And we are looking for, our stewarding organization to see some of that and help to define wealth and those changes as we move forward with this opportunity.
Thanks for sharing that. And in that, you mentioned the power dynamic in transferring to a trust fund of some type that would be managed and distributed, in part because of transferring that. Well, I'm just saying, I guess, is it the power dynamic that exists in that could exist in philanthropy. Could you talk about that power dynamic and why it's important to the Bush Foundation to move that power, move that to a different entity, the thinking behind that?
Well, I think it's really a respect and regard for community. I mean, the community knows best about the way they think, and the way they see an opportunity like this to be leveraged into their greatest, advancement. And I think, foundations have a particular privilege and a particular point of view, and then they have money, and so oftentimes, well, they've got the money, so how do they want us to write this up, or how do they want us to do this? When we there, I'll give you, for example, the idea of having 100 million, oftentimes, there's lots of another road of conversation I know we could go down, but I think the question is, do we expect them to pay out that 100 million by a certain date? Does that need to be in the hands of individuals in 6 years and 10 years? What is it that you want? Or can we put that into accounts and try to earn interest on that and sort of keep that over a longer period of time, or over, into perpetuity? I never can say that word as well as I want to, but is that the way we want to do that? And when, my colleague Jackie and I were poised with that question, it was clear, for us and in the foundation, we'd already talked about this and said, no, this isn't, we aren't deciding that. That's up to you. And that's the kind of, I'm just saying, like, people that were inquiring about this opportunity, I'd say that, and then they say, wait a minute, what did you just say? Like, they just wanted to be really clear about that, because, a lot of times that's an example of the kind of parameters or expectations or power that, the Bush, Foundation or other foundations, make, or strings that they attach to these kinds of opportunities. And sometimes that comes out of, obviously some, wise thinking, but also it can be paternalistic, right? And to say, well, we know what you should do with this. And really, this is an opportunity where that dynamic of power, we wanted to make sure that we were naming it, that it's our intention to share power. So we didn't just do that and answer those questions. We're talking about what that means to share power with this program. And as we think about the foundation, we're trying to define that and own that as we think about as our design and development of other programs as well. It's all still, those are all in flux, but I would just say that this has been an influential process and an intentional process.
Eileen, what do you hope that the grantee, not the intermediary, not the organization that's going to receive the $50 million for African American communities, or $50 million for Native American communities, but what do you hope the grantee, their grantee experience is? What's the illustration of that grantee, or an example of one or two in your minds?
Yeah, I think about young people and people that have families. For instance, just having to have a home, that they can step forward into and be able to, and it doesn't have to, whatever that means to them, I think that those are the kind of experiences that, are to have the kind of experience where they feel like developing or moving themselves forward for themselves and their families is a real focus for them. I don't know how to articulate this other than, there's when you've gone without, or you realize that the deck is stacked against you, or you try to move forward, and you run into brick wall after brick wall, whether you can't get a home loan, or you've saved, and now you're going, and there's issues with land, with tribal communities, and trying to build a home or put a home someplace. A lot of times you just, you lose some hope. You live in a place where, you learn to settle, or you learn that that's not for you. And I think that this opportunity of for each organization, the Black and Native community, these opportunities that, we've hopefully given enough leeway to the community and to the stewarding organization that they can design something that helps to restore some hope for individual people, that they can take some steps forward and really create a path for not just themselves but for their family to follow behind, and they get to define that. I want also to say that the broadest number of to people to be included in whatever that means for them, that there is a spectrum of what wealth, a racial wealth gap, or what the gap is between us and non-Native people or other folks. There is a piece of that. It just feels like, well, what is the basics? Do I have to move from one apartment to another apartment to another apartment? Can I just be in one place for a while? There's a lot of different approaches that I would like to see at the end of the day, that individuals have hope, and they have a way and a path towards the dreams that they're holding, and they haven't given up on.
Eileen, this idea has come from somewhere. The process that this is where the Bush Foundation landed had to have been very energizing and thought-provoking. Can you take us through, how did the Bush Foundation land on this idea and this program, this initiative?
Oh, there's so many sort of like little bit of lines, and I wouldn't say it was a direct line, but I think it was really, there's something that I would point back to about our board of directors, and we have, some great representation from across the region on that board, where they've been having what I would say, mock decision making, they've done in their retreats, where they've really wrestled with big questions, like what if we gave all of, we had an exercise, if you will, with the board, and we made the case for instance, paying out all the endowment, right? The case for and a case against, and board members who they had to pick they were put on a team, and they debated that a little bit and had that conversation, and issues around what about issues around, should we give money to, or should we use our corpus to only focus on areas that could have the greatest impact and in the world or in the area, and all of those sorts of what I would say topics that the board discussed at that time really were focused on some of the criticism of philanthropy and the larger wrestling that philanthropy had done, and I think that built a muscle for the foundation board of directors to explore ideas that they hadn't, they weren't really in the moment having to make a decision upon it. All of us can do well of any kind of exercise like that kind of opens our minds and gives us an opportunity to stretch and hold a different perspective, not when it counts right at the moment, right? So I think that those kinds of, I would point to that as sort of a critical point for a number of topics and issues that the board, that the Bush Foundation has prepared itself for this moment. And so, when we watched the Ford Foundation use some social purpose bonds, and they had basically, those are folks that are listening, that's really an opportunity for philanthropic organizations to borrow money and to raise funds to over the long haul for them to activate in ways for their goals. And we saw this opportunity that Ford had done with their social purpose bonds, and we thought, well, maybe we could do that. And that was a learning curve. We had never done that at the foundation, and so that was a step that was really critical. And those of you that are philanthropic, get in the weeds about, that's like, oh, I want to learn more about that. Well, we certainly can talk about that. But, our CFO, Greg Keene, and others just, were able to talk to people at Ford and others, and were able to activate that opportunity. And so that got the money, available to us right away. And we made that kind of a decision. And then really it was an opportunity to think, well, what would 100 million, what could we do with 100 million, to address racial inequities and in our region. And we played around with 2 or 3 ideas that were sort of thrown on the table, and fundamentally we landed on this idea, and then that was an idea that then was taken to the board, and with between August and November of 2020, is that right? Seemed like it was just so long ago, but it was 2020. That how would we design that? And so there was some early thinking about that, and we tested that with leaders within the Black and Native communities, tested those ideas. Jackie and I did, and that gave us a sense of some of the approach that we might take, how we might word things, how we think about even the word reparations, right? That's a powerful word. It means a lot of things, and it means something different for a lot of folks, and for Native folks it resonates differently than it does for our Black relatives, and so we figured out how we wanted to talk about this. With us, it meant really a restorative or really reparative action with the spirit of reparations along those lines, and just trying to stand, because that means something legally, right? Reparations means something legally, and as a role often for really the government. And so we had to stand next to those words in those times. And now here we are, months later, and trying to really see what would be the most community-driven, community, power sharing that we could create. And really, we think the people that are closest to the ground and we believe in those organizations, and we've had a history of investing in those organizations. So that just made sense for us to kind of design an approach and a process that would allow those organizations to raise their hand, both either individually or even as a collaboration of organizations, to come together and say, we'd like to be the steward of this opportunity.
I think there's so much here to learn
Right?
from.
Right?
There's so much that other philanthropies can learn from, and not only the nonprofit sector, but just our whole region and nationally, how all this has come together. You mentioned there are a couple ideas, so I'm super curious, and also really interested for the sake of what we could learn from. What were other ideas that came up?
Yeah, I knew as you kind of went there, it's like, oh, you're going to tax my brain. Well, I know that one of the ideas was really to try to, the bottom line was for the money to invest $100 million into directly to nonprofits, into organizational development kind of programs, which is generally how the Bush Foundation, not generally, but it's one of the ways the Bush Foundation invests its money already. The intention around individuals was the other type of idea. So, was that a way to design and to design an opportunity was for nonprofits to design more programs and to look at those issues. And I honestly can't remember the other one right at the top of my head, Matt. But I would say that when we really sat next to the idea of investing in individuals, as powerful as that is, and as hopeful and investing in our relatives' dreams, that all of those folks live and work in community and are impacted by a system that has problems and issues itself. And so it wasn't really, it would have been a missed opportunity, and like what would we be thinking if we thought that was the only way to achieve this, to address racial wealth gaps, or to address issues around racial inequities, if we didn't think about the system itself. And so, in addition to the $100 million, the foundation has set aside $50 million over the next 5 years, where we will be looking specifically for initiatives and granting opportunities through our Community Innovation Grant Program for systemic changes to address racial wealth gaps. So we're looking to make grants in organizations and collaborative efforts that are really transformational and are getting at some of these systemic issues that face individuals around addressing racial wealth gaps. Sorry, you got me. I need more caffeine for you.
No, you're great, Eileen. So I want to just make sure, because racial wealth gap is not a common phrase that at least I hear in Rapid City, and I think it's not a common everyday phrase that is talked about at this point in our country. Will you just give a quick definition of racial wealth gap? And then if there's any resources that you recommend or the Bush Foundation recommends, maybe we can add those to social media later or direct people to the Bush Foundation for more information about that. But just racial wealth gap, quick definition, Eileen.
Yeah, I totally agree. You know, I was like, what is racial wealth gap? What is that? It's like, oh, as a Native woman and a community member, I'm like, oh, our communities, our families, we live in that racial wealth gap. Like that's some phrase that is sort of points at things like, just the disparity gap, right? Around, we realize high levels of health access, issues around challenges around accessing health care, issues around home ownership, the number of people who are Black or Native who actually own homes is, the gap is very wide from the dominant community. And then I would say that, issues around education, and we hear things about high school dropout rates, or we hear things about issues about retention in college students. We hear so there's other issues that are, that I think we are talking about that are sort of in that bucket or that frame around racial wealth gaps. But it really is the distance and the amount of money or space or time that is a disparity between Black families and Native families compared to their white neighbors, and issues around health, wealth, and home ownership, the number of businesses that are Black or Native owned, the not to mention just the issues around real estate and land and home. All of those pieces are what I would say are what are known in the traditional frame of racial wealth gaps, or the racial wealth gaps in this country.
Thanks, Eileen. Well, I'm sure there are resources for people to learn more, which I'm sure are found on the Bush Foundation website. And as we find them, we will try to add to social media. And if other people find them, please share them out.
I can also just point that on our website, we had done a number of research ourselves on racial wealth gaps and the data that's out there. So you can find that on our website, and I can put that in the chat here. I think I know how to run that system over here. I'll put that there, and then you can share that out with your folks as well. And that's, certainly that was the research we'd done. And if you look at the citations, there's a number of reports and research that they can look at.
Perfect. Thanks, Eileen. So the Bush Foundation supports this region, and it's home to both you and me. How do you describe our region when you talk to people that are on the coasts who have never been here?
How do I describe that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the most amazing place in the world. Hello.
And why is it the most amazing place?
Well, I, of course, as a Lakota, I am, unabashedly or unbiased. I'm not unbiased about this, but I do feel like it is the center of this country, and this focus of for Lakota people, this perspective, and for Hidatsa people and Mandan Hidatsas and Ojibwe relatives. These are the homelands of Indigenous people that are continue to thrive and live in these homelands and still hold these places as strongholds and places where our communities and cultures continue to live and grow, and that we're still here. This is a place where you will find folks who still have that we have these original teachings for millennial, and that is a rare find. I often talk to people in other parts of the country, and we all struggle and are harmed by the lack of real knowledge and education about Native people in this country, and that, the Reclaiming Native Truth research study that really focuses on the popular cultures, or the public opinion polling of people about Native people. They're hungry to learn more. They realize that our schools have not educated them well about Native people, and they're hungry to learn and they want to learn. And so I think when I talk about this region, I think I talk about that first. And then I think about the strong and beautiful people who came here to make a life for themselves, probably unbeknownst that, that they were coming under, breaking of treaties by the U.S. government. They were just like, Homestead Act, let's go, and that reality of this part of the country, I think, is really still the front lines of the kind of understanding and misunderstandings of our own history. And yet in a place where we are so interconnected because of geography, particularly, I'm from Western South Dakota, and, weather is the great leveling, when people say, well, come to South Dakota and wait 5 minutes, the weather will change. I think they say that in other places. I've been around a little bit, but it's really true for us, right? But I do think that the leveling of our relationship with Unchimaka and Mother Earth, and, when you're out on the prairie and you're fixing fence, like, the reality is you need to be ready for anything. And I think it creates a certain worldview and perspective that is really unique to this part of the country. And I think that mix of deep cultural knowledge and teachings, and along with people who are really know that they're connected to the earth and the land here, whether you're native or non-native, you see that connection. That really creates a powerful mix that I'm really proud of. And, there's things of any of our families or communities that we really are, we struggle with, and people in our family that we kind of go, oh my goodness, yeah, that's us too. And that is a reality for this part of the country too, that we are struggle with our difference as well. And we're continuing to figure out what are the ways that we communicate with other people. So we're no different than a lot of other places, but I think that's the kind of things that I tell people about South Dakota, that we aren't far enough apart from each other to disagree for very long, because sooner or later someone's going to be broke down on the road and they're going to need some help, and we help each other.
Thanks, Eileen. The U.S. has seen over 700,000 deaths due to COVID. Would you talk about what you are seeing and hearing from nonprofits in our communities about how the pandemic has impacted their work?
Yeah, our nonprofit leaders are tired. I mean, it's hard. It's been really hard. People are obviously, for this long haul of the pandemic, they've had to pivot and adjust the way they provided service. They've designed new programs, but they are deeply committed. I think that we also see a lot of our nonprofit community leaders really struggling. The missions that they have maybe are, because of the pandemic, they aren't able to provide the same kind of services, or they've had to adjust services. And so, excuse me, not all, but I think that they've really we see our nonprofit leaders reaching out, of course, to one another and saying, what can we do together? So we're also seeing some partnerships that are emerging across the region in different, obviously neighborhoods and cities across the more urban areas. But we also are seeing new nonprofits, or new, I would say, what's the word that people use? Mutual help, right? Mutual help efforts that emerge into nonprofit work. And so there's sometimes a little bit more of a connection between folks that are doing mutual help, trying to help communities and meet some of the gaps that are out there. Either partnering with nonprofits or really struggling to get nonprofits that have been established to see that that opportunity and challenging nonprofits to, stretch themselves in these times of the pandemic. I certainly, those are pretty broad brush statements, obviously, about nonprofits, and each one of them are in their own challenge. And I think nonprofits, particularly in rural areas, are seen as are in a place where they're seen that they're needed maybe more than ever, and the kind of resources that are needed to fill that gap just maybe aren't there enough for them. And so I'm really encouraged by the kind of networks that they're leaning into, and hopefully seeing the kind of new things that they can create together.
Why is it the nonprofits? Why do you suppose it's nonprofits' responsibility or role in our society to fill those gaps? That it seems like they're being stretched, like you're saying, and they have to be more malleable. The nonprofits that are on the ground, I guess, I'm thinking, come to mind as you say, the rural nonprofits.
Yeah, well, I would also just say that in general, my experience of Native communities and non-Native communities, there's just again disparity there as well. The level of readiness to participate, or the number of nonprofits in general are less in those communities, and so they're closest to the ground. And I think what is closest to the people, it's not just talk about ground as some sort of idea that's out there. They're the people. They're sitting there watching the children, looking for something, someplace to go or be a part of something safely in their community. And so why is that? Are they seen? I think that because it isn't equal, right? We have a large private sectors and we have large government, but we haven't developed that nonprofit arena. Government can't fill the void, or they're not creating programs fast enough or connected enough to really support that. I would say that's not necessarily true for Native communities. When you see Native communities actually, their tribal government is often providing the kind of programming, because there isn't as large or robust of a Native nonprofit sector to fill that gap. But, to your question, I think that the place that I see Native nonprofits really focusing right now is really trying to say, well, what is it within the system? I think they're the first focus on the system maybe working or not working, and their programmatic approaches are sort of a signal to the kinds of systemic changes that need to happen.
So I have a question about community. And during this time, do you think the definition of community and society have changed with the pandemic and the broader awareness of racial injustices?
Do I think the community definition has changed? Well, I think that community is I think that in this time, community, we're being challenged to hold multiple definitions of community at the same time. And given the pandemic and, what happens in one part of the neighborhood or community or something that you're a part of, it's going to affect you. You are a part of that. And I think that you are seeing now a definition of community that maybe you grew up or you thought you knew you were a part of. You're actually part of something bigger, and it's not just an idea that's out there in the world around community. It is something that really is something that does matter to you, and you have to make choices, and the choices that you make today are going to impact you and this larger community. So I think that we have become, I think that for many reasons, one of them being, the role of media or social media in a time now, you can be brought very front and center to another place and another part of your community. Should you choose to open yourself up to, difference, I think that you are able to see that you are a part of something. And I think innately as human beings, we want to know that we are all human and we all see things. But when a relative or a friend or someone that you don't even know, you start to see how they're truly affected by this pandemic or by issues of racial injustice and inequities in this country, it does really call not just what do I do? Do I get the vaccine? Do I put a mask on? Do I do this? Do I see that what happens in their world is going to impact me too, does impact me, does say to the world that I have a place to play, and a place and a responsibility to see that future generations are not having to have the same discomfort, dis-ease, we have to choose to do something now.
We're getting questions from some of the folks that are tuning in. And I think along the way, I think I want to ask a question about the malleable and the role of nonprofits that we were just talking about in community and the importance of it in society, and the slower response of government, possibly, as well as the limitations of for-profit based on profit motivations. Where are foundations in this? Where are, to the word that you refer, perpetual endowments and power dynamic that is involved there with any body? One of the questions about any kind of body that's a funding agency, and the differences in power, that whether they're I don't know what the question actually is, but it seems very complicated no matter who ends up with the power, if it's or the funds, because funds are power or can be power. There's going to be a dynamic there. And then I guess my thought is what's the role of ultimately a nonprofit, a foundation that will be in existence because of the government structures that exist in our country, will be there forever. I don't know if there's not really I guess I just put it out there. Thoughts on those two things, that the power dynamic, as much as we want to flatten the playing field, if one entity has money and others don't, there's a dynamic. And then if there's a structure that exists in our society that allows for the protection of a corpus, that separates itself from those that are closer to the people, not the ground, but the people.
Right. You got that.
I don't know if there's any thoughts on that. It's more responding to some of the comments and then talking through it.
Yeah, I think there is a challenge to philanthropy that has existed and still exists and is, paramount in these times. Is, how valuable are you to community? And in what ways do you want to be valuable? And there's this idea that there's this long haul, that we want to be here for as long as possible to do as most good as we possibly can. That's an approach. That is one way to think about that is what's best to do with this corpus, that is the way to do that. And, it's a philosophical choice, It assumes that now is not the most difficult time. Maybe there's a more difficult time than now in the future. Every age of our human race, and particularly the last 52 or so 100 years, not quite 100 years, but of the place of philanthropy in this modern age. What about after World War II? What about during the 60s, during the civil rights unrest? Where was philanthropy? What was, was that the most difficult time? It's now, because of a global pandemic, it's now the most difficult time. And I can't say, and I don't mean to just just sidestep that, but also what is it that you have now to give, right? And this
And
100
what do we,
million was, sorry.
no, and what do we believe in the future?
Yeah.
What do we believe? Do we have enough belief in the future of other
Right.
people to give? Right. I mean,
Right.
that's
Right.
there's
Versus now where, paying all of that out in philanthropy. And I'm, certainly want you to know that, I am just one person who works in philanthropy. I found out yesterday I'm one of 90 Native people who work in philanthropy at all kinds of different various levels. I mean, I'm not very many people, right? But, as a Native person, and I think about our philanthropic ideals and our commitment to generosity, our leaders, our community, our people don't keep things beyond their own lifetime if they can, if they're intending to live by and wanting to live by those sorts of philosophies. And our folks and relatives to the west, the potlatch, a traditional way of natural giving and philanthropy has been a way of life for Indigenous people for time immemorial, and that sort of giving and generosity and sharing of wealth has been a part of our ways of living. And I think that, working in philanthropy, understanding now the factors and the circumstances around how philanthropy is charged with or to give its money on an annual basis, I definitely understand those constructs. And yet, as a Native woman who works within the community or within philanthropy, I too live with that same challenge of like, well, what would that mean? What if now is the time? And we are seeing more. I have colleagues who work in philanthropy who have philanthropic organizations have done the shift to say we are committed to paying out the remaining of our corpus. And they're taking action now to do and invest all of that money in community now and at this time. And I think we are seeing some organizations making that decision, and leadership saying now is the time.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting because it also, I think, says that we believe the future there'll be there's more philanthropy to come in the future by people that will come next. And we have to trust in those people. And that's for we could carry on for another hour
Another
just about this.
conversation, Matt.
So, but here's really quickly, we've talked a lot about racial inequities. What role does advocating and challenging the legal systems have in this effort?
Sorry, can you say that one more time?
What role does advocating and challenging the legal systems, the actual structural systems that have perpetuated and created the racial inequities, what role does that have in how do we challenge those constructs legally and through advocacy? And is that a role philanthropy should step into more?
Yeah, I think that we have seen philanthropy, loosen its dollars really for community to take the lead, and that philanthropy should be following that lead. There are ways in which philanthropy is restricted, to do a certain amount, but there are avenues and places where philanthropy can be and is supporting, those sorts of legal and systemic changes in the system. And so I do think that there are more and more opportunities. It does challenge maybe existing ways that philanthropy has been using its dollars. And I think this is a time when more than ever, we should be looking at all of the avenues that we have and pushing our own comfort level in philanthropy to look for opportunities to change legal structures and to be a part of those shifts as well.
What have you learned about life or your work over the last couple of years? As we wrap up here, what are the biggest learnings for you?
I think the biggest learning is that I'm exactly where I'm meant to be in that moment, and to stand into my experience and my teachings from my community, and that my voice in the room is not more important than others, but it is valuable, and I need to bring that into the community, into the room of decisions and perspectives and designs of programs and processes, because accessibility for particularly Native people, rural communities, that perspective is needed. And I think I've learned that I have a place and that opportunity now, and I need to use every day well.
One last question. Is there a poem or a book that you most enjoy or you're reading now?
Yeah, I just finished Brandy Carlisle's memoir, Broken Horses, and I have to tell you, I just was incredibly moved by her music, but I do feel like she really shines a light on issues generally around poverty in this country, and rural poverty in particular, and mental health. And I'm so moved by her vulnerability, and I am always honored to be around people and who are willing to share their vulnerability. So I appreciated that book recently.
Eileen, thanks so much. She was on Saturday Night Live. I don't know if you caught her.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. I tuned in.
Well, have a great. Thanks so much. Thanks for your time today, for yesterday, these words. And due to COVID, we're all virtual. We'll make a contribution to the Susie Kappa Art Center in your name, and really appreciate your time and look forward to seeing you in person soon.
Yes, yes.
Have a wonderful rest of the day. Thanks everybody for joining us, and hope you guys have a great day and rest of the week. Thanks, Eileen.
Thank you. Kalame.